Morning and welcome to T3C. It's great to see all of you here. What a privilege it is that we're able to gather on Sunday mornings to worship God. Special warm welcome to those who are here for the first time. Whether you're passing through during the summer or looking for a spiritual home, we welcome you and we look forward to getting to know you better. Well, we are now into the second half of our Summer Junction series, focusing on the book of Ruth. Believe it or not, we only have 2 more sessions after today. And I trust that you have found that our junction discussion time after service from 11:30 to 12:30 has been fruitful and edifying. And if you have not tried it yet, I would encourage you to give it a try today after service as we meet in the gym for small group discussion. So far in our series in the book of Ruth, certain themes have come and been repeated over and over again. Themes like God's providence, Redeemer, brokenness, loyalty, steadfast loving kindness, or hesed. Themes that we can relate to in our lives today. And this morning, our passage, we come to Ruth chapter 3, verses 14 to 18. But first, I'm going to do a quick recap of the first 13 verses in the book of Ruth chapter 3 that was covered 2 weeks ago. So we're going to do this in 2 scenes. Scene 1, Naomi's concern for Ruth's future. Naomi once again is concerned about Ruth's future and wants to make sure that Ruth gets remarried and is provided for in the future. Naomi establishes that Boaz is a relative and a possible kinsman redeemer. If you have forgotten, a kinsman redeemer is, we have on the screen here, the definition of a kinsman redeemer: closest male relative responsible for protecting the interests of needy members of the extended family, to provide an heir for a brother who has died, to redeem land that a poor relative had sold outside the family. This definition is found in your Junction Handbook. So Naomi devises a plan. Dun, dun, dun. That's scene 1. Scene 2 is the execution of Naomi's plan. It's midnight. Boaz is sleeping on the threshing floor. Ruth quietly goes down to the threshing floor, uncovers Boaz's feet, and lies at his feet. Of course, Boaz is startled. Who wouldn't be startled if you find out somebody suddenly sleeping at your feet, right? He is startled. There's this dialogue between Boaz and Ruth, where in essence, Ruth proposes marriage with Boaz, for Boaz to be the kinsman redeemer. Boaz agrees that he is a kinsman redeemer, and I'm sure the audience is clapping and so excited. But Boaz says, there's another relative who is closer than me. And that person has the first choice of redemption. But Boaz says, I will be your redeemer if the other one says no. And so Boaz makes a commitment to Ruth that in the morning he will go and deal with the situation and there will be resolution. Boaz tells Ruth to continue lying down at his feet until the morning, probably because it was dangerous for Ruth to get up and go back home in the middle of the night. And she does. That's scene 1, and that is scene 2. And I probably haven't given the right emotions to this because I've been told, Boaz and Ruth, so romantic. I don't know about that. I was just worried, can Boaz sleep at night? Would someone sleep at his feet? What happens if he twitches and kicks? Or how can Ruth sleep at night as she's thinking, is Boaz going to be the one? Is the other person going to be the one? And this morning, Ruth chapter 3, verses 14 and 18 is scene number 3. Dun, dun, dun. One would probably hope that the author would get to a quick resolution and let us know, is it going to be Ruth marrying Boaz or the other guy. But verses 14 to 18 do not allow us to get there that quickly. Very sorry about that. But these 5 verses are very important, as it is an important bridge that leads us to focus on the story moving from Naomi and Ruth to Boaz. What may be lost in the suspense of who marries whom is further revelation to us about the character of Boaz. And nowadays, in our world where personal character is seldom stressed, the person of Boaz and his character is something that teaches us and challenges us. And so starting in Ruth chapter 3, verses 14, we're going to look at certain aspects of Boaz's character. And so we look at verse 14, where he says, "So she lay at his feet until the morning, but arose before one could recognize another. And he said, 'Let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor.'" Boaz is an example of integrity. It shows us that while in a potentially compromising overnight situation, Boaz acts with integrity. Boaz acts with moral uprightness and pure motives towards Ruth. It says here, Ruth gets up at the crack of dawn while it's still dark, where you can't tell who the people are. Boaz here says he's concerned, not necessarily for his own integrity, but also for the integrity and reputation of Ruth. Earlier, Ruth chapter 3, verse 11, Boaz says, and calls Ruth a worthy woman. And here, verse 14, he says, "Let it not be known that a woman came to the threshing floor." One can imagine if such news of this encounter were to get out. The gossip of a seductive Moabite woman victimizing an older gentleman would just run rapid. Any chance of Ruth fully integrating into the Israelite community would be much more difficult. And even the role of Boaz as a redeemer could be forfeited. Integrity. Integrity is doing what is right in the eyes of God, even when no one else is watching. Doing what is right in the eyes of God, even when no one else is watching. Integrity is being faithful to God, whether in the privacy of your own room or whether out in public. And we ask ourselves, are we someone different on Sunday compared to Monday to Saturday? Living with integrity as a follower of Jesus in the midst of a world that seems to favor corruption, that favors the compromising of principles, is not easy. Choosing to live a life of integrity, to be beyond reproach, may not necessarily be a popular decision either. Over the past week, there's been this story in the news. This news is about a candidate in America who's running for Mississippi governor. His name is Robert Foster, calls himself a Christian. And so the short version of this story is that a woman reporter, last name Campbell, had requested to accompany Foster on his campaign trail. Foster responds to this request by saying he would only agree if she brought a male colleague. Foster is quoted as saying, "I didn't want to end up in a situation where me and Ms. Campbell were alone for an extended period of time through the 15 or 16-hour day. So out of precaution, I wanted to have her bring someone, a male colleague. Now, this is similar to a practice of the late Billy Graham. So Foster had made a vow to his wife that he would not get into any situation with the opposite sex, which could not only be a source of temptation for himself, but something that could be misperceived, misunderstood, or created a wrong impression for others. As a consequence for taking this stand, Foster has been labeled a sexist and has been flamed on social media. For us today, it is the strength of Christian character through the power of God that keeps us steady when the world around us seems to be falling apart. We are to do what is right in the eyes of God, not necessarily what is easy. It may mean taking a stand on some issue, which may make you unpopular with your friends. It may mean taking a certain action or inaction that singles you out amongst others. Because being Christ-like is countercultural. Being Christ-like is countercultural. It goes against the grain of what our society and what our culture teaches us. And that is not easy. Further, Boaz is an example of generosity. Boaz is an example of generosity. We see this as we read on in verse 15. Boaz says, "Bring the garment you are wearing and hold it out." So she held it and measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. Then she went into the city. The garment that Ruth is wearing is most likely a large shawl or a cloak. And so she takes it out as Boaz has requested. And Boaz measures 6 measures of barley. The famous painter Rembrandt helps us to visualize this act with his interpretation of this verse in a pen drawing. Now, what is difficult with this verse is the author uses the term measure. Boaz measures 6 measures of barley. A measure is an unknown unit. It's like us saying, he drank a measure of bubble tea. You have no idea what size the bubble tea is. He ate a measure of fried chicken. You have no idea. And so here, we're told that Boaz gives her 6 measures of grain of barley. So there's this ancient dry measure of goods called an ephah, similar to what we call our bushel. 6 ephah would equal 80 to 130 kilograms. So probably not. The measure probably did not equal an ephah. A measure is probably equal to more to a seah, which is about 1/3 of an ephah. This would mean about 26 to 43 kilograms grain of barley. Highly generous and manageable weight for Ruth to carry either on top of her head, over her shoulder, or on her back. Now, this act of generosity by Boaz is not the first time we have seen this. Maybe you remember back in Ruth chapter 2, verse 14 to 17, another example of Boaz's generosity. It said, "And at mealtime Boaz said to her, 'Come here and eat some bread and dip your morsel in the wine.' So she sat beside the reapers, and he passed to her roasted grain. And she ate until she was satisfied, and she had some left over. When she rose to glean, Boaz instructed his young man, saying, 'Let her glean even among the sheaves, and do not reproach her.' And also pull out some of the bundles for her and leave it for her to glean, and do not rebuke her. So she gleaned in the field until evening. For Boaz, generosity was not just a one-time thing, but part of his character, part of who he was. And so at the end of verse 15, in the ESV, it says, she leaves for the city, she being Ruth. There are some other translations, instead of she, has the word he, meaning Boaz leaves for the city. I'm pretty sure both of them did leave for the city. But these two different translations is really based on which manuscript is used for their translation. Gets the grain and now leaves. So let's now imagine. Let's go back to Naomi. Verse 16. And when she came to her mother-in-law, she, Naomi, said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" I could just imagine Naomi waiting up at home all night, waiting for Ruth to come back. And there she is coming back. And what does she say? "Naomi, so, what happened? Tell me. What is so interesting here, the author summarizes in verse 17 in one sentence by saying, "Then she told her all that the man had done for her." And from there, jumps back to the 6 measures of barley. Because Ruth says in verse 17, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me. For he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" The purpose of Boaz giving this grain to Ruth is for Ruth to give to Naomi. Yes, Naomi is worried for Ruth in her future. But ironically here, Ruth's role is to deliver Boaz's blessing to Naomi. We see the word empty, and empty was used earlier in the book of Ruth. So if you remember back in Ruth chapter 1, verse 21, Naomi returns back from Bethlehem, and she says, "I went away full, and the Lord has brought me back empty." Remember that in 121. Well, now God has provided for Naomi through Boaz's generosity by the giving of the 6 measures of barley. Naomi, as a widow, no longer needs to worry about the lack of food. And so for us, who are followers of Jesus, generosity should also be a mark. You should always have that mark of generosity. To bless others with what God has blessed us with. To bless others with what God has blessed us with. Now, it has been said that givers, people who give, can be divided into 3 types. The first type, some givers are like a piece of flint. To get anything out of a piece of flint, you need to take a hammer and hammer it and hammer it and hammer it really, really hard. And even then, you get a few shards, a few chips and sparks. Other givers are like a sponge. To get anything out of the sponge, you have to squeeze it and squeeze it and squeeze it. And then the more you squeeze, finally stuff comes out. But others are like a honeycomb. A honeycomb, which just overflows with its sweetness. We should be like honeycomb, that the generosity just flows out of us. What can 6 measures of barley look for you? What can 6 measures of barley look for you? Being generous with what God has blessed us with to be a blessing to others. Perhaps 6 measures of barley could be money, could be time, could be resources, could be your muscles to help somebody move, could be your brain to help somebody with their homework. Not to do their homework, but help them with their homework. Let's get that straight. Right? Perhaps it's a listening ear. Perhaps helping a newcomer who has come to this country. Over the past few weeks, there's been a collection of non-prescription sunglasses for the short-term mission team that's going to go with Kenya, to go to Kenya with Molly Children Family Organization. They're leaving at the beginning of August. This collection of non-prescription sunglasses will end next Sunday. Water Ambassadors Canada and the short-term mission team that's going to Honduras at the end of July, they're collecting new toothbrushes next Sunday only to be used to promote dental hygiene at local schools in Honduras. Perhaps your 6 measures of barley can be in the form of toothbrushes and sunglasses. I received a text message this past Wednesday out of the blue. I'd like to share this message with you. It said this: "Hey, Pastor Ed, I just want to encourage you to fight the good fight. That our purpose here on earth is to glorify God in hopes that God's kingdom will flourish. So in whatever circumstance you're in, pray for the Holy Spirit to continue to empower you. I know you're not perfect, but what gives us that drive for God is God himself. So continue to remind yourself of the gospel and the work that Jesus has done for you, praying for you." For me, this was a 6 measure of barley text message. Your 6 measures of barley is only limited by your own imagination and creativity. Your 6 measures of barley is only limited by your own imagination and creativity. Verse 18. Boaz is an example of responsibility. Boaz is an example of responsibility. Verse 18, she replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out. For the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." Naomi tells Ruth to wait, to stay put, to stay calm, to be patient. We know that waiting is difficult. We experience that all the time. Pastor Glendon spoke a few weeks back on Ruth chapter 2 on waiting on your turning point. We were challenged then about waiting on God. So I need not repeat that. But what we have here in chapter 3 is Boaz, an example of someone who is responsible. He will do what he says. The matter of who will be the kinsman redeemer will be settled today. That is what Naomi has told Ruth. Not to spoil anything, but Boaz is already on it. If we just skip to Ruth chapter 4, verse 1, it says, "Now Boaz had gone up to the gate and sat down there." The city gate is where the discussion and resolution will take place. So Boaz is on the job. Verse 18 contains the last words that either Naomi or Ruth directly speak in this book, as Boaz takes center stage in the next chapter. So for Boaz, for us today, he is an example of integrity, of generosity, and responsibility. So who becomes the kinsman redeemer? Will it be Boaz? Is it the other guy? Sorry, but you'll have to wait one more week. So, what are you supposed to do then this week, you ask? Well, here are my 3 suggestions. One is this. This week, read ahead. Read Ruth chapter 4, verses 1 to 12, and find out what happens next. Second is this. Pray to God to help you identify and to change certain actions in your life that may be inconsistent with your Christian witness. Pray to God to help you identify and change certain actions in your life that may be inconsistent with your Christian witness. And third is this. Determine your 6 measures of barley and give them away. Determine your 6 measures of barley and give them away. Or in other words, determine how can you be generous with God's blessing to bless others. We will now be approaching the communion table. I'm going to ask Pastor Sam and Sally to join me there.